Annabelle has asked, what are some of the common stumbling blocks when trying your hand at historical fiction for the first time?
I think so. When I started writing screenplays, they were almost all, looking back at them, they were almost all contemporary. They were almost all very much based on life as I knew it. Like the first screenplay I wrote was based on my college years, and then there was one based on boarding school, and so the voices were easy to find. And I remember writing like it's a project that was abandoned, but it was like an old Hollywood screenplay. And I remember like writing one act and it feeling very, very stagey and very mannered. And I think one common thing that I find with historical fiction is that like people don't sound like people. Like I think, people always, as far as I'm concerned, they always sounded like people. They always spoke in like emotional ways. Like we didn't, regular people in the 1930s didn't speak like Katharine Hepburn. You know what I mean? Like they were in their lives. And I think that's something like finding a sense of organic, natural, conversational dialogue is really important. Like making the characters feel, again, it goes back to what I was saying about like we're always alive right now. Like people in the past were living in the now. It wasn't the past to them. They have to feel grounded in the moment. And I think sometimes in my experience of writing historical fiction and reading some, it can really feel like the writer is kind of creating like a mannered form of speaking for the characters. It doesn't feel real. So that's what would come to mind.
Yeah. And I think, one way of getting over that is just to read a lot of historical fiction and see how that author has infused the character with life as opposed to just making them a talking head.
We went through it on a movie that I worked on once not a movie I did as a writer, but we were talking a lot about like set design. When you think about it as an author, you're in charge of everything. You get to write the sets, the costumes, the dialogue, this. But we were talking about how like when you look at a lot of the movies and TV shows you see in a certain time period, like they'll fill the costume and set design with everything from that time period. Like you see something in the 80s and you're like, everything looks so 80s. And it's like, but no, because most homes in the 80s were designed in the 70s or like decorated in the 70s. And most people were still wearing like, it's not like everyone could afford a brand new 80s wardrobe. People were like, they might have bought one piece, but then they were still wearing their sweater from the 70s. It's like life doesn't like, we look back and we're like, that's defines the era. But really the era was like holding all the previous eras within it. And so I think sometimes people, they lean too much on the history and they make it feel stagey, for lack of a better word. It feels like you're kind of like a time capsule of that year, but really that year holds all the preceding years within it.
All right, so you can have the leg warmers, but you got to get rid of the jelly shoes and the, like bangles.
It
Just
depends
pick one.
what you're doing. But if you have a character doing it all, then it has to be part of that character's personality. Because the fact is, and it's like, it doesn't, people weren't like all living in some kind of like,
Madonna music video.
Right, exactly. A Madonna music video, even though we want it to be.
Yeah, awesome. If you enjoyed this video, we've got a lot more on writingmastery.com. Check the description for links to our blog, free writing tools, and more. Happy writing.